So it's a kind of a continuation from the last video I did about AA hates religious people, and AA really doesn't appreciate nor care about spirituality. They're only interested in converts to the AA cult religion, uh, which is it's basically kind of like somebody had posted online. It said a lot of religions hate any competing religions. They don't like their competitions, and I think that's almost more true when it comes to AA's weird irrational belief system than they even realize. But I thought I would continue a little bit about the fact that AA is pretty obvious. They hate people who are atheists, or as they call it, agnostic temperament in their stupid book, which, by the way, there is no such thing as an agnostic temperament. Being an agnostic is not an actual temperament. An agnostic is somebody who says there's no way to know if there is or isn't a deity or a god. But in regards to a religious belief system, in terms of agnosticism, the translation of agnostic is literally lacking knowledge or without knowledge. It has nothing to do with being of a certain temperament. It has nothing to do with an attitude. It has nothing to do with anything like that. It's literally a fanciful way of saying you just don't know. Just like an atheist doesn't really have a position when it comes to, one argument they used to throw out a lot in meetings. They would say, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist, which they're assuming that a person who doesn't believe in God, or someone who doesn't believe well, they call it higher power in some circles and some meetings, has some kind of faith system behind that. They don't. I mean, literally the atheist position, and like I said, I'm not what I would call an atheist per se, but the atheist position is that in the absence of all evidence, then the default position is simply not believing. In fact, they've used many examples about this in the past, about, if somebody makes a claim about some supernatural entity that they say can't be seen, can't be heard, can't be touched, can't be examined, can't be looked at, can't be put under the microscope and dissected, then I just don't believe in it. I mean, it would be no different than if somebody came along and told me, there's a bunch of little green men that are camping out in my bedroom, and they have little drug orgies or parties or anything when I'm not around to see it. I said, well, how do you know they're there? And if your answer to me was, well, you can't see them, you don't know that they're there, but you have to have faith that they're there, then I would say, well, I'm sorry, but I don't see any convincing evidence to believe that, so I'm just going to pass on that. That's literally all atheism is. It's not about an attitude, but the overall painting I saw in a lot of AA meetings is that if you're an atheist, you must be very angry, or you must be very disappointed and bitter that the world as it is didn't work out in your favor. That the only reason someone who has an addiction problem would even be an atheist is because their life fell apart due to their addiction, so they just rejected God, as they oftentimes phrase it in their meetings whenever this topic would come up. I used to inwardly cringe when I would hear them crack open the chapter on we agnostics, or I'd see them read that thing out of the 12 and 12 where it talks about these people's attitude can only be described as savage. They will not believe in God. Well, I don't know of any atheist that I've ever seen that say, I just will not believe in God no matter what. I think most of even the more well-known atheists back in the days when you had the big new atheist wave, like with Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens and Dennett, I can't remember his first name. He had a big book about determinism and indeterminism. I said big book about his book, but no, it was a thick volume I tried to get through way back about determinism and indeterminism, and I forgot who the other guy was, but anyway, their attitude was not an attitude of I will not believe no matter what. Their attitude was there's nothing around here that's giving me any sign or any scientific evidence underneath the microscope or underneath close examination that makes me see any reason to believe. Atheism is not a faith position. It's not An atheist doesn't walk around throughout the day saying, I really do believe that today there is no God in the sky above me. I really do think that. I mean, like this morning when I woke up, I saw the sun rising up and I said, there's no God behind that sun. I really, truly, sincerely feel that in my heart of hearts. I mean, that's not even close to an atheist position. An atheist position, most of the time, in my opinion, if you just don't believe that there's a religious entity that's in control of our lives or the universe or anything else, you probably don't dwell on it that much. There's a lot of people that I saw entering in AA, they would turn into true converts at a later time, but I saw people in AA during my time there that would come in as newcomers, and they would say things like, well, I wasn't raised in a religious household, the church wasn't really important in my upbringing, I just never gave this whole religious idea any thought or any credence. It just never meant nothing to me. Flash forward about 6 months down the road, and they're in there, I was an atheist when I got here. I hated God. I hated the Bible. I hated it all. And I was just spiritually and mentally broken when I got it. Yeah, that's not what you said when you were new. You've learned the lingo on what you're supposed to say because you have this caricature of what atheists look like and talk like and act like. And that's what you're parroting now for approval points from the ruling AA hierarchy that wants you to follow the script. I mean, in my own personal experience, I didn't walk away from the religion I was brought up with because I was angry necessarily. Now, yeah, I had anger at the hypocrisy of the church. I had anger towards certain things that I saw going on in religious institutions, but that's not what played a part in me saying I no longer believe in the religion of my youth. There was a while right after I made a decision to leave the church, and I still believed in the basic doctrines, and I still believed in, the things I had been taught. I still kind of prayed. I still more or less had, I guess you could call it Catholic conditioning. I still believed in all of these things. I just said the man-made institutions were completely, absolutely corrupt, and there was no good in them, is how I originally approached it when I walked away from religion. But when I walked away from actual belief itself, it wasn't because I was drunk and angry and saying, well, God never did nothing for my drinking problem. God never gave me $1 million in my bank account, so he's not real. That wasn't my attitude at all. It was a series of events, a series of things that happened, too long and really not that significant to go into detail about here. But I just, I don't even recall an exact moment. I don't recall anything precise. I just remember one day I realized I no longer believed in that sort of thing any longer. It had nothing to do with being angry. It had nothing to do with what We Agnostics book talks about. It pigeonholes atheists into this position that if you don't believe in God, you must think your own wit, your own willpower, and your own human intuition, I guess, is the end-all and the be-all of everything, and it's very, very arrogant. I've never, it was like I heard people, they used to say it to me in meetings all the time, you need to stop playing God. You need to really just stop playing God. It don't work trying to play God. And I thought, even at my very worst in life, where I was reaching for a bottle at 2 a.m. to try to get rid of the shakes and the vomiting, I never thought I was God. I never said, I'm getting drunk this morning because I'm God and I have the answers to everything in the universe included. It was that kind of line that they was always handed people about, you got to quit playing God. It never made any sense to me. I mean, I don't know of anybody outside of someone who's delusional that actually believes they're God. And if you're an atheist and you don't believe in divine entities or divine interventions, you certainly don't automatically start thinking of yourself as a law unto yourself and a God unto yourself. It's what they call, a lot of the times when they're arguing in philosophical circles, they call it a straw man argument. And I see people throw that around a lot online without any clear idea of what that is. They'll say, well, this is a straw man. No, you're attacking a straw man here, and they have no clue what that is. What a straw man argument is when you take a position that someone has not taken, and you attack that position as though you're invalidating that person. A real clear-cut example of this is, right after a real bad relapse one time, I had one of these AA old-timer gurus that said, well, I guess you thought you had to get up real early in the morning. And I said, what are you talking about? He said, well, you got to get up real early in the morning to make the sun rise if you're God, right? And I thought, I never said I was God. I never said I don't believe in God because of God. I never even took that position. Okay, I went out on a drunken bender because I went out on a drunken bender. It didn't have nothing to do with me thinking I was God. It had nothing to do with me going to a liquor store and buying a bottle and saying, you know what, I'm going to crack open this bottle of vodka and I'm going to drink it because I'm God and God's not real because I am God. I mean, that's a completely moronic statement to make, but it's a completely moronic picture to paint somebody into by claiming if you're drinking, you just don't believe in God. By the way, I would say that growing up in the religious institutions of my youth, there was a whole lot of drinking that went on among the faithful and the believers and the priests and everybody else. There was a joke I heard one time, and I never really had that much exposure to the Protestants, but I remember someone saying the difference between a Catholic and a Protestant is the Catholic will say hello to you in the liquor store. So some of those people would probably argue that being abstinent from alcohol has nothing to do with faith in a deity, and they would actually be correct. Drinking is not a religious problem. It's not a moral problem. It's it's a psychological impulse control type issue that can have roots in hundreds of thousands of different causes. Some people become addicted to alcohol because they like to drink alcohol. Can you imagine that? It's just that simple. There's not a religious fundamental problem here with a guy who's drinking too much or doing drugs or whatever it is. It has nothing to do with a lack of faith or a lack of power. It's funny, it says in their We Agnostics thing, it says a lack of power, that's our dilemma. No, it wasn't a lack of power in my situation. It was actually a lack of information. It wasn't until much later on when I learned about the problems I was experiencing with OCD, the problems I was experiencing with certain impulsive behaviors, some of the things that I figured out in cognitive behavioral therapy, and some of the things I figured out through that dreadful thing they talk about in AA called self-knowledge, the reading about, reading and learning on my own, that I began to kind of see some of the triggers and some of the reasons why I kept running to liquor when I would have these triggers or these pressure points. I guess that's a kind of a chiropractic term, the pressure points in the brain that was causing me to blindly react and run to liquor stores. It had nothing to do with a lack of power. It had nothing to do with a lack of willpower. It had to do with I didn't have a lot of understanding about my own behaviors and my own motivations. And AA certainly didn't help that. All AA did was fill me full of religious guilt tripped me about shit that I had no reason to feel guilty about, preached to me that I was completely powerless, and constantly put me in a neurotic, anxiety-ridden state. And it used to just irritate me to no end when they would talk about, this is what happens when you can't find the power greater than yourself. Well, power greater than yourself is a completely meaningless term. I mean, literally, power greater than yourself. I mean, the United States Army is a power greater than myself, okay? The Congress and the Senate of the United States of America technically is a power greater than myself. It has absolutely nothing to do with poor impulse control and drinking problems. But it's bad enough that they're treating an impulse problem or a drinking problem or whatever you want to call it or refer to it as. I don't want to use the term alcoholism because it doesn't exist. There's no such thing as alcoholism. And I don't want to call it a disease. And I don't want to call it necessarily all these other terms. I mean, some people use alcohol use disorder, but there's nothing to do with alcohol use disorder and spirituality. I mean, they're treating an addiction problem with faith, and faith doesn't have anything to do with it. Worse, they don't even have a clear-cut understanding of what they're talking about. They pigeonhole atheists, they pigeonhole agnostics, and they come up with these definitions that aren't even based in any kind of concrete reality, and they repeat these definitions over and over as though they're absolute truths that can't be questioned, that they're set in stone, that nobody can actually step outside the boundaries of what they're setting. And they misrepresent those terms all the time. I think I've talked about it on here before. I can't be 100% sure, but I remember when I was forced one time to listen to these Joe and Charlie tapes in treatment, they were given these definitions of an agnostic believes God is real, but God doesn't want nothing to do with him. An atheist says, I don't like God and I don't want no part of God, but a true believer. And I'm thinking, that's not what the fuck those definitions even mean. I mean, how can people listen to this ignorant shit and with any kind of, it just, sometimes they'll say certain things that are so ignorant, that are so backwards, that are so out of touch with any objective reality that you can't do anything but sit back and marvel at the stupidity of it. But it's amazing to me that that an organization that has a whole entire anti-atheist view and a whole anti-atheist bent that talks about agnostics as though, we have agnostic temperament, it says in the big book, believed our own willpower was the end-all and the be-all. Rather arrogant, wasn't it? Which is not what an agnostic is. And there's no such thing as an agnostic temperament. They literally got this painted picture of some guy sitting somewhere by the side of the road, drinking up the last few remaining brain cells he's got with a big jug and a cheap Thunderbird wine and saying, I'm God, I'm God, I'm God. That's literally the picture they're painting, which is not even close to what the reality of the situation is. This whole entire thing, though, doesn't really want you to solve a problem in terms of faith, in terms of what you believe in terms of any of those things. It just wants you subservient to the cult religion. Bill W. is not special pleading with you to believe in his higher power in his We Agnostics book in order to cure your drinking problem. He's only doing that to make you more dependent on the cult religion. AA is really not interested in what you believe at all, because if you're an atheist and you haven't drank in 20 years, as I've seen a couple of those in AA, they'll talk bad about you behind your back, but they're not going to say too much to you because you got the 20 years backing you up. If you're a religious person in AA and you're constantly relapsing, they'll bash your religion all the time. I do remember one particular old-timer that said he himself was an atheist. He wouldn't say it very often, but of course he played word salad with it. He would say something like, I'm an atheist, but I believe in spiritual principles. Well, spiritual principles, the term spiritual is abstract. It can mean anything and everything, and therefore it's kind of meaningless. It's kind of like the people that will tell me you believe something came from nothing. Well, nothing. What is nothing? Can you show me a box of nothing? Can you cut me out a little slide of nothing and put it under a microscope? It's an abstract term that doesn't really have any concrete meaning. So when you're saying you're an atheist who believes in spiritual principles, the term spiritual, that could mean anything and everything. And it never sat well with me, but behind his back, everybody'd say, well, I got it on good authority. He never was a real alcoholic. That's how come he's an atheist. That's how come he can be an atheist in AA, because he didn't really have alcoholism. He got sober when he was 30 years old. He was a young man. He's intellectual. He's a high bottom drunk. He doesn't have to solve the problem of faith. Any excuse they can make to justify the cult religion continuum, they'll do. Now, if the guy had relapsed, you can guarantee there would have been a big wave of anti-atheist persecution against him. And they would have expected him to come back in a couple of months, crawling into the meet and saying, I was arrogant all those 20 years. I was arrogant. I thought I did it all myself, and now I see the truth and the light. Because that's really what they claim your motivation is for believing in their God, is through cruelty and punishment and pain by drinking yourself almost to death and then accepting their religious help. It even says you have to be willing to accept spiritual help, or else. The implication being if you don't convert to the cult religion, you don't. Which, by the way, has absolutely nothing to do really with quitting drinking. You're taking a thing that doesn't work. You're throwing it at people that have compulsive problems with their addictions, telling them that this will solve their problems, and then when it doesn't solve their problems, you blame the people for it, when in truth it's your phony treatment program that's not helping anybody overcome their addictive problems. There was more I wanted to add to this, but I think I've kind of lost my train of thought with this one. But just to kind of piggyback off the last video, I wasn't actually defending religion. I was actually trying to paint a completely concrete picture of the cult religion as completely exclusive to the cult religion only. In other words, it's not going to accept anything that's atheist. It's not going to accept anything that's religious if it doesn't line up with cult dogma. And I think that's it for now. I'll see you guys soon.